Daniel Cole had never considered himself special. He was 34 years old, born in a small town in Ohio, and he had spent most of his adult life doing jobs that kept him moving. He served 6 years in the military, worked private security for a few more, and when the chance came to join a diplomatic protection team heading into deep space, he took it without much thought. It was just another job. The pay was good, and he had no one waiting for him back home. The vessel was called the Starling, a mid-sized diplomatic ship that humanity had built specifically for first contact missions. It was not impressive by galactic standards, but it represented everything humans had learned in their short time among the stars. Daniel had been aboard for 3 months now, assigned to protect a princess named who was traveling with a small human delegation as part of an exchange program. They were unlike anything Daniel had imagined aliens would look like. They were tall and slender, with skin that seemed to shift between pale silver and soft blue depending on the light. Their eyes were large and dark, filled with an intelligence that made Daniel feel like a child standing before a very patient teacher. They had been traveling the stars for thousands of years before humans had even discovered fire. Their queen was said to be nearly 1,000 years old, kept alive by technologies that humans could barely comprehend. Princess was young by standards, equivalent to a human in her late teens. She had an endless curiosity about humans that her handlers found embarrassing, but that Daniel secretly enjoyed. She would find him during quiet hours and ask him questions about Earth. She wanted to know why humans ate so many different foods when a single nutrient paste would be more efficient. She wanted to know why humans laughed when they were happy and also sometimes when they were nervous. She wanted to know why Daniel smiled with his teeth showing, which apparently the found slightly alarming. Daniel answered her questions as best he could. He was not a scientist or a diplomat, so he could only tell her what he knew from his own experience. He told her about the taste of his mother's apple pie and how no nutrient paste could ever replace that memory. He told her about the way laughter could break tension in a room full of scared soldiers. He told her that showing teeth was a sign of friendship among humans, not a threat. The princess listened to everything with those large dark eyes, and Daniel could see her trying to fit these strange human behaviors into her understanding of the universe. He found himself looking forward to their conversations. She reminded him of his younger sister, who had died in a car accident 15 years ago. That same bright curiosity, that same sense that the world was full of wonders waiting to be discovered. The attack came on a Tuesday, though calendars meant little in deep space. Daniel was standing outside the princess's quarters when the first explosion rocked the ship. The lights flickered, and alarms began to scream. He had his weapon drawn before his mind had fully processed what was happening. The attackers were, though Daniel did not learn this until later. They were members of a radical faction that opposed any contact between their ancient civilization and the younger species that were crawling out into the galaxy. They believed that humanity was a contamination, a disease that would corrupt the purity of culture. They had decided that killing the princess during a human diplomatic mission would serve as both a warning and an insult. Daniel did not know any of this in the moment. All he knew was that armed figures were coming down the corridor, and the princess was behind him, and he had a job to do. He pushed back into her quarters and took position at the doorway. The first attacker came around the corner, and Daniel fired twice, dropping him. The second was faster and got a shot off that scorched the wall beside Daniel's head. Daniel returned fire and the figure fell. But there were more coming, and Daniel could hear the princess behind him breathing in short, frightened gasps. The corridor filled with plasma fire. Daniel felt a burning pain in his left arm but ignored it. He kept shooting, kept the attackers pinned, kept himself between them and the princess. He heard voices shouting in, heard the sound of running feet, heard the princess calling his name. Then one of the attackers broke through from a side passage that Daniel had not seen. The figure raised a weapon aimed directly at the princess. Daniel did not think. There was no time for thought. He simply moved, throwing himself into the path of the shot. The plasma bolt hit him square in the chest. The pain was unlike anything he had ever experienced, a burning that seemed to consume him from the inside out. He hit the ground hard and felt the cold metal of the floor against his cheek. Above him, he could hear more weapons fire as the ship's security team finally arrived. He could hear the princess screaming something in, her voice raw with terror. Daniel tried to move, but his body would not respond. He could feel himself fatting, his vision going dark at the edges. It was strange, he thought, how peaceful it felt. He had always been afraid of dying, but now that it was happening, he felt only a quiet satisfaction. The princess was alive. He could hear her crying, which meant she was still breathing. He had done his job. His last thought before the darkness took him was of his sister. He wondered if she would be waiting for him, wherever he was going. He hoped she would be proud of him. The security team secured the corridor within minutes. The attackers were either dead or in custody. The princess was unharmed, physically at least. She knelt beside Daniel's body, her silver hands stained with his red blood, and she would not let anyone move her until the ship's doctor arrived and officially pronounced what everyone already knew. Daniel Cole was dead. His body was placed in stasis according to standard protocol for fallen personnel. The mission was supposed to continue, the diplomatic exchange was supposed to proceed, but something had shifted. The princess refused to leave her quarters. She refused to eat. She sent a message to her mother, the ancient queen, and in that message she described what the human had done. She described how he had stepped into death without hesitation, how he had given his life for a stranger, for someone who was not even his own species. She described how his eyes had shown no fear in that final moment, only determination. Far away in the crystalline halls of the queen received her daughter's message. She read it once, then again, then a third time. Then she requested the security footage from the starling. She watched a human die for her daughter, and something ancient stirred in her chest, something she had not felt in centuries. She would not let this stand. Queen had ruled for 947 years. She had seen empires rise and fall across the galaxy. She had watched young species discover fire, then wheels, then starships, then extinction. She had made 10,000 decisions, each one calculated to ensure the survival and prosperity of her people. She had never once acted on impulse. She had never once allowed emotion to guide her hand. She watched the security footage 17 times in the first hour after receiving it. The human was not impressive by any standard she could measure. He was small, even for his species. His movements were efficient but unremarkable. His weapons training was adequate, nothing more. There were thousands of humans who could have stood in that corridor and done exactly what he did. But they had not been there, he had. The moment before the plasma bolt struck him, his face showed something that could not name. There was no fear in his eyes. There was no calculation, no weighing of costs and benefits, no desperate hope that someone else might intervene. There was only a decision, made in the span of a heartbeat, that her daughter's life was worth more than his own. They did not make decisions like that. They were an ancient people, wise beyond human comprehension, and they understood that survival was the highest value. An individual who threw away their life accomplished nothing. A dead hero was still dead. The universe did not reward sacrifice. It simply continued, indifferent to the choices of small creatures on small ships in the vast darkness between stars. And yet, found herself watching the footage again. She slowed it down, frame by frame, studying the moment when the human pushed himself into the path of the weapon. His body moved before his mind could have possibly processed the threat. It was not a conscious choice. It was something deeper, something written into his very being. She summoned her chief advisor, a name who had served her for 3 centuries. He arrived within minutes, his expression carefully neutral as it always was. The queen told him to have the human's body brought to the... She told him to assemble the finest bioarchitects in the empire. She told him that she wanted the human restored to life. His neutral expression flickered just for a moment. He pointed out respectfully that humans could not be restored. Their biology was primitive. Their neural structures degraded within minutes of death. The stasis field on the human ship might have slowed the damage, but it could not have prevented it entirely. The human was gone. Asked him if he was telling her that it was impossible. Hesitated. In 9 centuries, the Queen had never asked him that question. She had always accepted the limits of what could be done. She had always made her decisions based on reality, not desire. He told her that he would assemble the bioarchitects. The starling arrived at the 8 days later. Princess walked off the ship looking like a ghost of herself. Her skin had lost its luster, her eyes were dull, and she had spoken perhaps 100 words since the attack. Her handlers were concerned. Her tutors were worried. Her mother was focused on something else entirely. Daniel Cole's body was transferred to a medical facility deep within the palace complex. The bioarchitects began their examination immediately, working in shifts around the clock. They mapped his neural pathways with instruments that could detect the quantum states of individual electrons. They cataloged every cell in his body, every protein, every fragment of genetic code. The reports they sent to the Queen were not encouraging. Human biology was strange and inefficient. Their cells divided sloppily, accumulated errors, aged and died with shocking speed. Their neural structures were a chaotic web of connections that seemed to organize themselves through trial and error rather than design. And the damage from the plasma bolt was severe. The human's heart was destroyed. His lungs were burned. His brain had been deprived of oxygen for nearly 3 minutes before the stasis field activated. Read every report. She asked questions that forced the bioarchitects to examine their assumptions. She made suggestions that seemed absurd until they realized she had been studying human biology in her private hours, reading everything she could find about this strange species that had produced a man who would die for a stranger. Came to see her mother one evening. She found the Queen standing before a holographic display of Daniel's neural map, studying it the way she once studied military strategies and trade agreements. The princess asked why she was doing this. What was one human life against the countless concerns of the empire? Was quiet for a long moment. Then she told her daughter what she had seen in the footage. She described the look in the human's eyes, that absolute certainty, that complete absence of hesitation. She said that in 900 years she had never seen anything like it. She said that a species capable of producing such an individual was either very dangerous or very valuable, and she intended to find out which. Was not satisfied with that answer. She could see that her mother was not telling her everything, but she did not press. She simply asked if there was anything she could do to help. The Queen looked at her daughter, at this child she had protected and guided for so many years, and she felt something crack in the armor she had built around her heart. This human had done what she could not. He had thrown himself into death without thought, without calculation, without any hope of reward. He had simply seen a young life in danger and decided that his own life was an acceptable price to pay. She told to visit the human every day. She told her to talk to him, even though he could not hear. She told her that sometimes the mind remembers things the body has forgotten, and perhaps her voice would give him something to hold on to in whatever darkness he now inhabited. It was not scientific. It was not logical, but had begun to suspect that logic alone could not explain what she had witnessed in that footage. She turned back to the neural map and resumed her study. Somewhere in the palace, in a chamber of soft light and humming machines, Daniel Cole's body waited in stasis. His cells were frozen between one moment and the next. His brain held patterns that had once been memories, once been dreams, once been a man who smiled with his teeth showing, because that was how humans told each other they were friends. The Queen would not let those patterns fade. She would not let this small, impossible act of courage be forgotten. She would bring him back, whatever the cost. 4 months passed, and the bioarchitects learned more about human biology than the entire scientific community had discovered in the previous century. They learned that humans were made mostly of water. They learned that human hearts beat more than 100,000 times every day, pushing blood through a network of vessels that would stretch around their planet twice if laid end to end. They learned that human brains contained roughly 86 billion neurons, each one connected to thousands of others in patterns so complex that mapping them all would take longer than the age of their sun. They learned that humans were fragile and messy and astonishingly beautiful in their imperfection. The lead bioarchitect was named, and she had spent her career working on longevity treatments. She had extended the lives of thousands of her people. She had never failed to complete an assignment given to her by the Queen. But this assignment was different. This was not extending a life. This was rekindling one that had already ended. She told the Queen that the neural damage was more severe than they had initially believed. The humans' memories were fragmenting, dissolving like patterns in sand as the underlying structures degraded. They could rebuild his body, perhaps, but his mind was slipping away. Asked how long they had. Estimated perhaps another month before the damage became irreversible. After that, they could recreate his physical form, but the person he had been would be gone forever. They would be creating a copy, not restoring an individual. The Queen ordered them to work faster. Princess kept her promise. She visited Daniel every day, sitting beside his stasis chamber and talking to him about whatever came to mind. She told him about her lessons, about the books she was reading, about the gardens in the palace where flowers bloomed in colors humans had no names for. She told him about her childhood, about the time she got lost in the crystal caves beneath the city and was found 3 days later, perfectly happy, having made friends with a colony of luminescent insects. She told him about her mother. She said that the Queen had changed since his death. She was still the same ruler, still made the same careful decisions, but there was something different in her eyes now. A question that had not been there before. Did not know what the question was, but she suspected it had something to do with him. She asked him sometimes what it felt like to make a choice like that, to see death coming and step toward it instead of away. She did not expect an answer, but she asked anyway. In the 3rd month, reported a breakthrough. They had found a way to stabilize the neural patterns using a combination of technology and techniques adapted from human medical research. The degradation had been halted. The memories, what remained of them, were secure. Now came the harder part, rebuilding. The human heart was reconstructed first. It was grown from Daniel's own genetic material, cultured in a biovat that replicated the conditions of the human body. The bioarchitects watched in fascination as the cells divided and organized themselves, following instructions encoded in DNA billions of years old. The heart began to beat on its own after 6 days, a steady rhythm that seemed impossibly loud in the silent laboratory. The lungs came next, then the liver, then the kidneys. Each organ was grown separately and tested extensively before being integrated into the reconstructed body. The bioarchitects had to invent new techniques for almost every step of the process. Human biology was so different from that their standard procedures were useless. They were building a human from first principles, learning the species through the act of creating one. The Queen visited the laboratory every day. She asked questions that showed she had been reading the technical reports in detail. She understood the challenges they were facing, the decisions they were making, the compromises that were necessary. She never criticized, never complained about the pace of progress, but her presence was a constant reminder that failure was not acceptable. In the 4th month, the body was complete. Daniel Cole lay on a table in the center of the laboratory, his chest rising and falling with mechanical regularity as machines breathed for him. His skin was pale, his muscles were weak from months of disuse, but he was whole. He was physically alive. But his eyes did not open. Explained that the neural transfer was the most delicate part of the procedure. They had mapped his brain patterns down to the individual synapse, but transferring those patterns into a living brain was not like copying a file. The brain was not a computer. It was a living thing that changed with every passing moment. They could not simply upload his memories. They had to coax his brain into remembering on its own. The Queen asked what they needed. Said they needed time and luck, and perhaps something more. She said that human consciousness was not fully understood even by humans themselves. There was something about the way they experienced reality that could not be reduced to neural patterns and chemical signals. Some humans called it a soul. Did not know if souls existed, but she knew that there was a gap in their understanding that no amount of technology could bridge. Stood beside the table where Daniel's body lay. She looked at his face, at the features that had become familiar to her through countless hours of watching the security footage. He looked peaceful. He looked like he was sleeping. She told to proceed with the transfer. She told her that she believed the human would find his way back. She did not explain why she believed this. She simply knew. The procedure took 11 hours. The bioarchitects worked in shifts, monitoring thousands of data streams, adjusting parameters moment by moment as Daniel's brain began to rebuild its connections. Princess sat in an observation room above the laboratory, watching through a window, her hands pressed against the glass. At the end of the 11th hour, something changed. A flutter in the brain activity monitors, a shift in the pattern that had been static for so long. Daniel Cole opened his eyes. The first thing Daniel became aware of was light. It was soft and warm, golden in a way that reminded him of summer afternoons in Ohio when he was a child. He lay still for a long moment, not trying to move, not trying to think, just letting the light wash over him. He felt like he was floating in a warm sea, drifting somewhere between sleep and waking. Then the memories came back. They did not come all at once. They came in fragments, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place one by one. He remembered the starling. He remembered the princess. He remembered the corridor filled with plasma fire and the feeling of his weapon kicking in his hands. He remembered seeing the attacker aim at and knowing with absolute certainty what he had to do. He remembered dying. The light seemed less warm now. Daniel tried to move and found that his body responded, sluggishly at first but with growing confidence. He lifted his hand and looked at it. It was his hand, the same hand he had always had, but something felt different. The calluses from years of holding weapons were gone. The small scar on his thumb from a childhood accident was missing. This was his hand, but it was also new. A face appeared above him. It was a female with soft blue skin and gentle eyes. She spoke to him in English, her accent strange but understandable. She told him that he was safe. She told him that he was in the royal palace on the... She told him that he had been reconstructed. Daniel did not understand that word, reconstructed. He asked what she meant. She explained, slowly and carefully, that he had died 4 months ago. His body had been brought to them by order of the Queen. The finest bioarchitects in the Empire had spent those 4 months rebuilding him, cell by cell, memory by memory. He was alive again. Daniel lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what he had been told. He was dead. He was alive. He was the same person he had always been, but also something new, something that had been created in a laboratory by alien scientists. He did not know how to feel about that. He did not know if what he was feeling was even real or just patterns in a brain that had been assembled from genetic templates and neural maps. The attendant seemed to understand his confusion. She told him that the Queen wished to see him when he was ready. There was no rush. He should take whatever time he needed. Daniel took 3 days. He spent those 3 days learning to use his body again. His muscles were weak and his coordination was poor, but the attendants were patient. They helped him walk, first with support and then on his own. They fed him simple foods that his reconstructed digestive system could handle. They answered his questions, though some questions had no answers they could give. Princess came to see him on the 2nd day. She stood in the doorway of his room, her dark eyes wide, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then she crossed the room in 3 quick steps and embraced him, her arms wrapping around him with surprising strength. She told him she was sorry. She told him that it was her fault he had died, that if she had not insisted on meeting the humans, if she had not been so curious, none of this would have happened. She told him that she had visited him every day while he was in stasis, talking to him, hoping that somehow he could hear. Daniel did not know what to say. He told her that it was not her fault. He told her that he had made a choice, and it was the right choice, and he would make it again if he had to. He told her that he did not regret dying for her. Pulled back and looked at him with those alien eyes, and Daniel saw something there that he recognized. Gratitude, yes, but also confusion. She did not understand him. She did not understand how someone could say those words and mean them. He realized that this was perhaps why the Queen had brought him back. On the 3rd day, he went to sea. The Queen received him in a private chamber deep within the palace. It was a simple room by standards, with walls of pale crystal and a floor that seemed to glow with inner light. She sat in a chair that was not quite a throne, and she watched him approach with eyes that had seen centuries pass like seasons. Daniel had never met royalty before. He did not know the proper protocols, the correct way to bow or speak or stand. He simply walked toward her and stopped at a respectful distance and waited for her to speak. She asked him how he felt. He told her the truth. He felt strange. He felt like himself, but also like someone wearing a costume of himself. He felt grateful to be alive, but also uncertain about what being alive meant for someone who had been rebuilt from spare parts. The Queen listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she told him about the footage. She told him that she had watched him die more times than she could count. She told him that in 900 years she had never seen anyone do what he had done. She asked him why. Daniel struggled to find the words. He said that it was his job. The Queen dismissed this with a wave of her hand, just as had predicted she would. She said that many people had jobs that required them to risk their lives. Very few of them stepped into certain death without hesitation. He tried again. He said that the princess was innocent, that she did not deserve to die for the sins of some political faction. The Queen pointed out that innocence had no value in the calculation of survival. The universe did not care about innocence. Death came for everyone eventually, innocent and guilty alike. Daniel fell silent. He thought about the question, really thought about it, in a way he had not allowed himself to do before. Why had he done it? What had driven him to throw away his life for a stranger from another species? Finally, he spoke. He said that he did not have a reason. He said that in the moment there was no thought, no calculation, no weighing of costs and benefits. There was only a young girl in danger and a chance to save her. He did not need a reason beyond that. Some things were simply right, and when you saw them, you did them, and that was all. Queen stared at him for a long moment. Her face was unreadable, her ancient eyes giving nothing away. Then slowly she began to laugh. It was not mocking laughter. It was the laughter of someone who had just heard something unexpected, something that challenged everything she thought she knew. She laughed for nearly a minute, and when she stopped, there were tears in her eyes. She told Daniel that she had brought him back because she wanted to understand. She told him that she had spent 4 months studying his species, reading everything she could find, trying to comprehend how a creature so fragile could produce such courage. She told him that she still did not understand, but she was beginning to think that was the point. Daniel Cole became an unlikely fixture in the court. He had no official title, no formal role in the complex hierarchy that governed the ancient empire. He was simply there, a human among aliens, a curiosity that the Queen seemed unwilling to release. She summoned him often in those first weeks. Their conversations ranged across topics that Daniel had never imagined discussing with anyone, let alone the ruler of a civilization older than human history. She asked him about Earth, about the world that had produced him. She wanted to know about human wars, the endless conflicts that seemed to define his species. She wanted to know why humans kept fighting when they knew that war brought nothing but suffering. Daniel told her about the wars he understood, and admitted there were many he did not. He told her about soldiers who fought to protect their homes, their families, their way of life. He told her about the bonds that formed between people who faced death together, the way that shared danger could create connections stronger than blood. He told her that humans fought because they cared, even when caring was painful, even when it would have been easier to give up. The Queen listened to everything. She asked follow-up questions that showed she was not merely curious but genuinely trying to understand. She compared human conflicts to wars in history, pointing out similarities and differences that Daniel had never considered. She treated him not as a specimen to be studied, but as a teacher who had something valuable to offer. It was strange, being treated with such respect by someone so ancient and powerful. Daniel had spent his whole life being ordinary, being overlooked, being just another face in the crowd. Now he sat in private chambers with a queen who had ruled for nearly a millennium, and she listened to his words as if they contained wisdom she had been seeking for centuries. He asked her once why she cared so much. What did it matter to her what one human thought about war and peace and sacrifice? Was quiet for a long moment. Then she told him something she had never told anyone else. She told him that she was tired, not physically tired, but tired in her soul if they had such a thing. She had lived so long, made so many decisions, seen so many rise and fall that she had begun to wonder if any of it mattered. She had protected her people, yes. She had ensured their survival through countless crises. But she had done it all through calculation, through careful weighing of costs and benefits, through the cold logic that her people valued above all else. She had forgotten what it felt like to act from the heart. Watching Daniel die had reminded her. Seeing him throw himself into death without hesitation, without calculation, had shown her something she had lost somewhere in her long centuries of rule. She did not know what to call it. Courage, perhaps, or faith, or simply the belief that some things were worth more than survival. She had brought him back because she wanted to learn that lesson again. She wanted to understand how to be more than just a survivor. Daniel did not know what to say to that. He was not a philosopher or a spiritual guide. He was just a man who had done what seemed right in a moment of crisis. But he saw the hunger in the Queen's eyes, the desperate need to believe that there was more to existence than calculation and survival, and he did his best to give her what she was looking for. He told her about his sister. He told her about the accident that had taken her life, about the years of grief that followed, about the way he had eventually learned to carry that loss without being crushed by it. He told her that humans lived with the constant knowledge of death, that every human knew their time was limited, and that this knowledge shaped everything they did. He told her that maybe that was why humans could sacrifice themselves so readily. They knew they were going to die anyway. All they could choose was how, and why, and for whom. The Queen considered this for a long time. Then she thanked him and dismissed him, and Daniel walked back to his quarters through corridors of crystal and light, wondering if he had said the right things. Weeks passed. The alliance between humanity and the, which had stalled after the attack, began to move forward again. The Queen threw herself into the negotiations with renewed energy, surprising her advisors with proposals that were more generous than anything they had expected. She spoke of cultural exchange programs, of joint research initiatives, of a future where humans would learn from each other as equals. Her advisors wondered what had changed. Some of them suspected that the human had something to do with it, but they could not understand how. He was nobody important. He was just a security officer who had gotten lucky or unlucky, depending on how you looked at it. Princess found Daniel one evening in the palace observatory. He was standing at a window, looking out at the stars, his face lit by the light of distant suns. She joined him without speaking, and for a while they simply stood together in comfortable silence. Eventually, she told him what she had noticed. She said that her mother was different now. She smiled more. She asked questions about human art and human music and human poetry. She had even started reading human literature, struggling through translations of books that her advisors considered primitive but that she found strangely moving. Daniel asked if that was a good thing. Said she did not know. She said that change was always frightening, especially for someone who had lived as long as her mother, but she thought it might be a good kind of change. She thought her mother was learning how to feel again. She thanked him for that. She said that his sacrifice had given her mother a gift that no amount of technology or wisdom could have provided. Daniel did not know how to respond. He had not intended to give anyone anything. He had just done what seemed right in a moment when right and wrong were clear. The signing ceremony took place 3 months after Daniel's awakening. Representatives from Earth and the gathered in the great hall of the palace, surrounded by crystals that had been growing for 10,000 years. The treaty they signed spoke of trade and technology, of shared defense and mutual respect. It was a document full of careful language and diplomatic precision. But Daniel saw the way Queen looked at him as she signed her name. He saw the gratitude in her eyes and something else, something that might have been hope. Later that night, there was a celebration. Daniel stood at the edge of the crowd, watching humans and mingle together, sharing food and drink and laughter. It was strange and beautiful and utterly impossible by any reasonable measure. A young approached him, one of the palace servants who had helped care for him during his recovery. She asked him how it felt, being part of history. Daniel thought about the question. He thought about the man he had been before all of this, the ordinary man from Ohio who had drifted through life without purpose or direction. He thought about the moment in the corridor when he had seen death coming and stepped forward to meet it. He thought about waking up in a body that was his and not his, in a world that had changed while he was gone. He told her it felt like a second chance, not just for him but for everyone, humans and ancient and young, wise and foolish. They were all getting a second chance to be better than they had been before. The servant smiled and moved away, and Daniel returned his gaze to the celebration. Somewhere across the room, Princess was laughing at something a human diplomat had said. Somewhere else, Queen was watching her daughter with eyes that shone with something Daniel finally recognized. It was love, simple, uncalculated, irrational love, the kind that made people do impossible things. Daniel smiled, showing his teeth, and for the first time since his awakening, he felt truly alive.